Welcome to the Moms I Know with Sheila Walsh-Denton and Maria Anderson-Farner. Two moms on a mission to reclaim childhood and take you from surviving to thriving on your parenting journey. The Moms I Know is your go-to source for motivation, inspiration, and resources, and real conversation about motherhood and parenting with intention. Thank you for being a part of our community. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
When a baby is born, so is a mother. Rachel Hollinger.
Hi, this is Maria, and I want to welcome you to The Moms I Know. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing two very special women, my daughter, Rebecca Tumison, and her friend, Louisa Carter, both very accomplished women, mamas, amazing entrepreneurs, and they have been working together to facilitate women's rites of passages. And it has been beautiful to see this incredible unfolding of their business, Persephone Rising Rituals. And so this started out of their own need to create celebration and togetherness for themselves and for other mothers. I will let you hear much more about them as we go with the interview. And so I'm going to even let them introduce their own background and everything, because they're just such special women. And because I know them so well, I think it's better to hear in their own voices. But you're in for a treat. And so I want to welcome Rebecca and Louisa to our podcast today.
Persephone Rising Rituals was a way for myself and Rebecca as new mothers to kind of assert our new identities, I'd say. The quote that I just read, when a baby is born, so is a mother, really resonates with me, because when a baby is born, there's that sense of everything is so new. You're in a physical, emotional, spiritual space that you have never experienced before. And as I was thinking about it, it's almost like a tingly, like nothing is as it was, and it is yours to create. And you have this new baby who you need to nurture and take care of. But I think what also is resonant for both of us is that you have yourself to nurture and learn about too as a mother. And so when I met Rebecca, my son was 6 months old, and we sort of nurtured our friendship and got to know one another, and would just go for long walks and talk about our interests and what it took to be a mother and to support mothers and to raise children. And we kind of stumbled upon this joint passion or interest of holding ceremony and ritual for mothers as they were about to give birth, and really talking about the depth of this experience and how our culture right now doesn't do a great job of recognizing and honoring that time. And we sort of shared our experiences of sort of piecing together and learning how to hold space for mothers. And it was really cool to sort of watch this process unfold as we talked about what it would be like to start our own business. And I remember there was this incredible surge of energy as we were beginning to share ideas and our collective backgrounds and what we could each offer. And it really did feel like this, like, I am energy, like, this is who we are in the world. We've never been in this space. Let's create this company, and let's tell our friends, let's put it out to the universe, let's put it out to the world. And it was the way I make sense of it is like, this is me, Louisa, as a mother now. I'm different, and this is what I care about right now. This is what an offering is. And so I guess for me, it is sort of the birth of my identity as a mother. And so Persephone Rising Rituals really encapsulated that.
Beautiful. I love that. I don't know if we've really ever talked about like where we were in the beginning, kind of grappling with it all. And it was just so organic how it flowed to create this space and all the things too that we want to create with it for, branching out farther. I think the mother blessings are an easy in a little bit for rituals and ceremony. But there's so many more, and there's so much that we can do to create more meaningful space and and to just take pause and to create that intentional growth. That I think that's what, for me, a ceremony kind of provides. It's like a stepping stone to becoming something new. And yes, when we became, so it's my oldest, a couple years older, so I had a toddler. I was like in the midst of toddler land, and I was very fortunate that we, growing up, had a lot of exposure to different ceremonies and rituals and rites of passage. And my mom and I would go to the Women's Herbal Symposium in Northern California every year. I think I started when I was 3 and went until I was like 15. So I got to witness from 3 on every year this circling of women, about 200 or so women, around the young girls that were coming into their womanhood. And so that ceremony was just kind of, I took for granted almost, just commonplace that all girls would get that welcoming into womanhood. And then when I was fortunate enough to go through it, it was really profound and empowering, and all, like, it was kind of just all the senses were there. With the weather was there, the touch, the smell, just, it was a really intense moment. And my cycle has always grounded me back to that moment of just empowerment and being allowed to be in my womanness, which I think, as I've come into adulthood, I've realized is such a gift that a lot of maybe women don't have that, especially in our society. I've never questioned my ability to have strength and power, and also be able to take from the earth what I need to get strength. And so that was one. And then we had some Native American influence too, with some neighbors, and we were able to do a little bit more rites of passage with working into independence and doing things kind of on our own, probably at a similar time age-wise, around 14, 15.
Even the younger.
And younger. And just bringing in kind of lots of different elements and lots of different cultures, and just being able to really grow into myself, I think, was such a gift that I was given with my upbringing. And then I moved to Mexico at 16, and there were lots of influences with that culture. I had a pretty fast growing up experience living there for about a year. And then art was always my fallback, I guess, or my passion. And so art was kind of, I didn't even question that that's what I was going to do. And just, I love to create beautiful spaces and beautiful objects, and to just help bring more beauty into the world. And I think that's, those are the only accolades behind my name, that I have a BFA in jewelry, in metalsmith actually, but in art, fine art. And then with that, I've just branched into interior design, and also background with building. My dad's in construction, and so creating these spaces that are beautiful is my goal in life, kind of, and before parenting. But I'm currently pregnant with my 4th child, so that's kind of my focus these days, is just creating the space for my children, and wanting to create the little moments that are sacred for them as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I might add, she has 3 sons, and apparently this 4th, we understand it's a girl. So this whole concept of rites of passage for womanhood is going to be an interesting thing to share with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
A full circle kind of. It
Right.
feels.
Right. And so, Louisa, I'd love to hear yours as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. A friend of mine who actually did help my father create a book around his ancestry was the one who pointed out to me that I have a long line of, I guess you would say, ministers or spiritual leaders in my family. Mm-hmm. And I'd never really thought of myself as that, but I did. I grew up in New England. My grandfather was an Episcopal minister. His father was an Episcopal minister. It was very much, that was my spiritual upbringing. Although I never really resonated with it. It felt so empty and dry to me. But we also, a second half of that spiritual upbringing was just a huge love and reverence for nature and spending a lot of time in mountains. And if we skipped church to go skiing, that was like no big deal. That was equally as important. It was, so I never felt like pressure. But I will say, growing up, going to a church and sitting down and having that quiet time and watching my grandfather, lead sort of impromptu Easter services, it instilled a sense of, I think, stillness and ritual in me that I was absorbing it sort of unconsciously. And then when I was 20 years old, I decided very spontaneously to walk 350 miles of the Santiago de Compostela in Spain, a pilgrimage. And it was kind of this newfound strength, identity, I guess, at a younger age. And some of my friends said, "Do you want to go? Can I go with you?" And I said, "No, I'm going to go by myself." And I was terrified. I knew some people who had done it, but along the way, I went, and it was non-religious for me, but I would sit in these cathedrals and just find like sanctuary and stillness. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, helped me appreciate that pause. But fast forward, 10, 15 years, moving away from my family of origin, I felt like my calling purpose was sort of empowerment, and through tapping into the language of my body. And this was before somatic experiencing. There was something called focusing, and sort of the realm that I went into was psychology, and my family is huge on education. And so that really felt like the only way I could sort of move forward. It was not like, that was just sort of the most acceptable way for me. So I set out to like get the highest degree possible, and psychology was what fit for me. And so I spent 10 years getting a doctorate in counseling psychology. And in counseling psychology, I was really drawn towards feminist, multicultural practices, and sort of seeing like, well, our wellness isn't necessarily some clinical thing that needs to be studied in a laboratory, but it's really about our relationship with our own bodies, with our communities, with our cultures, and how that has been so robbed from us. So that is my background. And then I got pregnant and had, actually, I should say, this is a long story, but I actually had a miscarriage, was my first pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And it was a very pivotal moment for me in terms of ritual, because here I am faced with this enormous amount of grief. Yes. Never been pregnant before. I was 11 weeks gestational when I started miscarrying, and I had a very supportive midwife. And I'm so grateful that I was at that time where she said, "You'll be fine. This is what to expect." And I basically gave birth to this tiny little embryo. And in the lead up to it, my husband and I spontaneously put on a ritual, and we planted a tree in the backyard of this house we had just built. And Frank dealt with his grief through, the physical labor of digging the hole and putting the tree in the ground and having family surrounded. And I remember it was this moment for me of just feeling so lost. What do I do with this space? And I was so grief stricken and shocked that I didn't really know what I was doing, but I found myself driving around the town, bought chocolates from my favorite store, had a little crystal. Like, I was just gathering all these elements of ceremony. And we circled around the tree, and I had this beautiful little like pink quartz heart, and I pressed it into the earth, and I said this prayer to this, unborn, or this baby who it wasn't the time. And it was like time stopped, and I was surrounded by family, and we shared our grief, we shared our love, and then we feasted afterwards. And at that moment, the cramps started happening, and I went back, and my sister-in-law held my feet. My mother-in-law was like taking the heating pad for me, and they basically held me while I gave birth, and it was while I released, and it was the most profound moment for me. It was that moment that it was like ritual. This is what we do, and I think this is something that Rebecca and I really talk about. Is it's not something that you have to go to school and study. It's very spontaneous and primal, and maybe some of us are more sensitized to it, but it was so empowering for me to just see that I had this in me, and I didn't even know where it came from, and it facilitated this release for me. And it was something that was not medical, it was not removed, it was so like surrounded by the elements and family, and like it was painful. I mean, giving birth to a full term was a whole different story, but I didn't know any different. It was very painful, and my sister-in-law held my feet and massaged my feet, and I just remember thinking I couldn't do this without her, which speaks, I think, again to like the importance of connection and being witnessed. And
for sure. And I think that is back to just finding that community too, that you want to be witnessed by and held by. And it's so easy for us to just say, in our culture, I'm fine, or we like to talk about our pain and our suffering, and we connect on that as human beings a lot. But there's this piece of like, when there's actual grief, when there's actual trauma, pain, heavy stuff, a lot of people shy away from that and don't want to sit with it. And I think you've mentioned this to me, and I feel like I've had this a little bit just throughout my life of like, when stuff does get hard, I feel almost at my best calling. Like, I feel like that's where I'm able to show up almost my best, is when it's like a real human moment. And I think in creating these spaces for people to kind of quiet the mind and quiet the chatter, it facilitates maybe more people to be able to sit with that, with that shift, with the release, with the grieving, with the joy, whatever it is that we're trying to create, that it helps to facilitate that in a way that's really beautiful. And it's just like that, the planting of a tree, the gathering of whatever it is that feels sacred to us. I mean, there's the whole cacao ceremonies too. There's like, this is, how much time do we have? Like, there's so many ceremonies for so many different tea ceremonies, and most cultures around the world have these ceremonies that, as I said, like the rites of passage were just commonplace for me. I didn't know there was any difference of not having it. But our society in America, we're such a melting pot that we don't have just this commonplace. We have the baby showers and the more kind of showering with stuff, almost, it feels like, instead of really empowering the individual to go through these life processes that are really big and pivotal. And so how to create that time and space and pause. I love, that was the only parenting book I read, actually. Bringing Up Bébé, the French way. But it's it's a super cute book, but it's not, technical at all, but it's just about just taking a pause. And I think we're so quick to just jump into things and to kind of think about it after. But if we just pause and reflect and allow these processes to really sink in, they don't maybe come up as much in the future for us to deal with whatever that trauma was as much, if we take the time to really sit with it and feel it and experience it with all the senses, as you had mentioned too, that like bringing in different senses, taste, smell, touch, all of it. And the earth kind of provides a lot of that for us. And so, yeah, it's
your stories are both so beautiful and powerful and sad and strong and encompass all of these emotions and qualities of motherhood and humanity. And I'm sitting here just so grateful to both of you for sharing this with our listeners, because this is the profound parts of parenting where we can really reach out to each other, where we can embrace what is messy and difficult and hard and sad and full of grief, but also full of the future and who knows what this is all about. And so you've both shared your backstories and sort of how you came to these things. And I wanted to share just a little tiny thing of when I was a young mom, we didn't have these strong rites of passage. We had lots of ceremony and festivities in our family. And I wanted something more deep and meaningful. And so, Louisa, your story of how it came so intuitively is so beautiful. And Rebecca, your sharing of how you just grew up with it and kind of took it for granted. But back before that, I had to say something was missing. And how did I want to address this? And I actually went to a workshop that was about rites of passage. And the presenters were talking about different cultures and different ways of doing this. And I remember this man stood up and he said, well, I didn't grow up with any of this. How can how can I pass this on when I don't have it? And the presenter said, just because you didn't experience it doesn't mean you're going to deprive your children. And he said, you can create it together. And so the Women's Herbal Symposium, that was a creation of women coming together and putting together this beautiful ceremony that Rebecca grew up with. And then Louisa, yours was completely intuitive. And yet you instinctively knew. Women know we have this. And this is, the moms I know, we're tapping into each of these incredible wisdoms that we all have. And every woman, if we can sit in stillness, if we can tap into our innate knowledge as a female, as a woman, we know we have the answers. And so you two have articulated this so beautifully as to how it all came about and your own stories, and then moving forward with how do we create these. And so the two of you help people facilitate a meaningful ceremony, whether it's a blessing way or it's a welcome to womanhood or however it is. But I also know that you have other ways of honoring. And so I'd love for the two of you to talk a little bit about, how you see this benefiting the family or the woman or the man, the girl child, the boy, however, to become. I always felt that, if we had more of these ceremonies as we were growing up, we wouldn't have so much trauma in our lives. When we're surrounded by the people that love us, that we love, they're witnessing us. And so, are there elements of ritual that are always there for you as you help to facilitate these for people?
It's a big question. There's just lots of layers, because it's as easy as lighting a candle at a meal time and just taking a deep breath, to also creating the mandalas and the flower arrangements and the glamping tent setup and the rugs everywhere and creating what looks like a mini wedding to facilitate one of these gatherings. So I would say definitely just on the day-to-day, because that latter half isn't always practical to do or accessible to do. For me, daily, my breath is, we didn't get into all my story, but I've dealt with grief and trauma and health stuff, and coming back to my breath is always my biggest, I see it as such a gift that we have this power to breathe and to that's kind of our, we are alive. And if we really tap into our breath, I think it can help us to just understand a little bit how meaningful life really is. At least it reminds me. if that's one of my only gratitudes I have, of like, oh my gosh, I'm breathing today. Bringing in, going on a walk, and as you said, driving around and gathering things. Like if we can just go for a walk with our children and see what they find beauty in and what they find sacred, what they want to put in their pockets to bring home, if it's a stick or a rock or my middle child constantly is, picking up things that my art mind is like, well, why? That's not aesthetically anything that we're going to put on the altar, or, but it is. It's all so beautiful what nature creates, and so to kind of look at the world through the eyes of our children and what they're taking time to pause and reflect on, I think day to day is an easy way to just kind of tap in. Grounding is another really easy thing. If you have a little patch of dirt somewhere to stand barefoot, to just kind of remember your essence, I think is like the easiest, simplest ritual that we can do to kind of just come back to ourselves.
So I'm so glad that you pointed out the simplicity, that it can be as simple as lighting that candle at a meal, and then when we create, when you help a woman create a ceremony, or a family create a ceremony, are there other things that you bring in? I mean, for some people, this might be the first time that they're thinking about, what are you talking about, rites of passage? What do you mean by rituals and ceremony? And so, Sheila and I have talked many times about this idea of, bringing just the sacred into the everyday. But when you're actually helping a family create something more involved, or say, for example, it is a blessing way for a new mom to be, what are some of the elements that you might want to bring in to that?
Yeah, there's books and that's what I sort of relied on at first. I started actually sort of a hybrid, like it was a baby shower, but the mother wasn't ready to commit to a full mother blessing, but she wanted some level of intentionality. And so, people brought gifts and there was all the food, but I asked, and this was a very integral piece that you can bring in. But I emailed all the women beforehand and I said, so-and-so is bringing a daughter into the world. And what is some advice that you can give this mother for raising a daughter in this day and age? And what are the things you love about this woman, this mother to be? What are some intentions or well wishes or things that you think would be helpful for her? And it gave the women participants time, like 2 weeks or so, to really think and create and craft something. And then in that more traditional setting, I created a circle where we all sat around and there was some kind of a invocation that we were gathering for this mother. And this was a time to share what we had loved about this person. And from that sort of casting the circle, I mean, you can read a book and have a more sort of ceremonial prayer or invocation, offering spirit in, or it can be as simple as we're all here gathered together and let's share. And that experience of women sitting in a circle is so powerful, because everyone can see everybody. And one thing I try to do is sort of like address any anxiety and say there's no right answer here. And so I can almost like feel people's like letting go, and then people spontaneously share. And I think that is critical for me, because then people can share what's on their hearts, and then the mother is receiving all of this energy from all these people that are surrounded them, and it's like sharing this love. So I think that, and I bring that up because that was a great example of like starting to not really being totally confident or sure, but bringing in one element of ceremony into a more traditional setting. Getting people to interact with some kind of object. It's almost like it can be a reflection of, so a lot of times I have a little terracotta figurine of a pregnant woman and putting that in the center, or like special rocks, or it just sort of holds the space for what is up on the table right there. And the other sort of like tried and true thing, which I think is a great connector, that we've talked about is like having string,
Mhm.
and so you have a ball of yarn, and you talk about the symbolism of this yarn being sort of like the blood and the thread that connects us all. And everyone goes around and makes a bracelet around their wrist and then passes the yarn. And so as everyone does that, we're all connected by this ball of yarn. One practice that's really powerful is as you can sort of call in or acknowledge the matrilineal lineage as you take the yarn and put it around your wrist. You can say, I'm Louisa, daughter of Barbara, daughter of Nellie, daughter of Virginia. You can go back as far as you want, but that experience alone just
Bring in the ancestors.
It brings in the ancestors, and it reminds us of where we came from. And it's that pause to remember it. And then you think of all the collective wisdom. It's not just the women present, but all of their foremothers. That's super powerful. And you have the physical representation with the yarn of the connection that you hold. And then as you close it out, you cut the yarn and you make that known. But then everyone wears the bracelet until the mother gives birth, or however long need be. But I think having some kind of physical representation of the spiritual experience that happened, so that you can hold on to that and remember, like, I spoke those words, I witnessed this, and it's something tangible that you can take away with you. I've done a lot of ceremonies for mothers healing birth trauma, and I find having a bowl with flowers, for one woman in particular, there was a lot of just stuff she was having a hard time letting go of, and it was springtime, and I just went and grabbed a bunch of like old leaves that were still decomposing, and she put those in the water. And her physical experience of like naming her feelings and her unwanted thoughts while putting this like decomposing matter in water, and her experience of interacting with that and the presence of that, it just opens up portals into like so many different realms. So it's really, it can be anything so simple. But having that physical experience where you're like moving in space with things, I think is super powerful.
Beautiful. Absolutely. And also bringing in, again, the different smudges that you can do to try to kind of cleanse the space. There's not so much a science of it, but definitely the different scents for cleansing, for creating reverence, for all of that, I think is a nice piece to add, just to get people back to that breath too. Because usually when there is something that is a new scent, we take a deep breath to either acknowledge it or recognize it, put a name to it, and that just gets us breathing and a little bit more grounded. Definitely just the circle. I mean, we're kind of in this little crescent for the new moon energy right now, but the circling of women is something that is sacred regardless of what's happening. I think that it's so innate that we do. I mean, usually in our modern society, it's like circling around food or wine or something and gossiping or whatever. But to create an intentional circle is really powerful. And actually early on when we started Persephone, I had this dream about this huge circle. I told you this, right?
I don't remember. You might have. It's been a few years now.
Huge, this huge circle of people and women. We love to talk. We love to just gather and kind of, just talk about all the things. And I think that you and I have spoken on this, Louisa, of like, how do we refocus that chatter energy to a more sacred energy? And this dream, I was trying to get the attention of like 35, 40 women that were in a perfect circle. It was this perfect circle, but I couldn't quite get that pause to happen to tap in to something a little deeper. And I just like innately put my hands up and just said, put palm to palm and send your energy out through this entire circle. And one by one, the ripple effect from me, each woman put their hand up and just felt this, it was this golden ring that and then like there was light that came from it, but just passing our energy through each other until we get back to our center. And it was just calm and paused. And I did that at the next ritual that we did, and I felt like it really did just create that. I mean, the string does that tangibly, that you can see, but that we have this energy force that we can put through this circle too. So just circling around and creating an altar space or something meaningful to look at, if it goes with the directions to call in the different directions, different ancestors, whatever it is, to just really create kind of this container, because that's kind of what we do, is to create this container to just experience these more meaningful moments in life. And everything can be meaningful. It doesn't have to be the crazy loss or the crazy joy, and it is a bit, I mean, birth is a bit of a loss too. And so there are so many different feelings that come up with so many different moments in our life. And so how do we grapple with all the different things that come up? And I think something that you do really beautifully, Louisa, is to really show up for what's needed in that moment with whoever it is that we're trying to help facilitate, and to really listen. And if it is like, well, I don't really want all the sage and Palo Santo and cedars and sweet grass and all of that, and I don't need the gemstones and rose water and all the different things, but I do want something to happen that's more than just the cute baby clothes or diapers or what have you, which are necessary. But I think that just listening to what is actually needed, if the person's not quite ready to step through that portal to go to the next space, like how can we help create just a safe container again to help them step through that, to help them feel like they have enough wisdom in themselves to step into that new space. And so I think that that's probably the biggest, just to whoever it's for, if it's for the child, the boy becoming a man, the girl becoming a woman, which women, we get a more tangible thing. But just what does that individual person really need? If it's a grief ceremony, if it's a trauma ceremony, if it's a birth ceremony, whatever that individual that we're trying to support and hold, what do they need at that time? And to go from there. And if it is this elaborate visual feast, or if it's just a quiet little circle of close friends, whatever it is, to just help put forth that.
Yeah, that's I love that you brought that up. It reminds me of that's always where I start, is just like having a conversation with someone for an hour, 10 minutes, or however, whatever present itself, but just taking notes and writing down the things that like have a lot of energy behind them. And then I'll sit with those. And it's almost like from that moment, I've opened up the space, and I'll take some time to be quiet and see what comes in. And I have a good sort of story of how this can be on the fly, which as most mothers, that's how we operate, with like the little minutes we get here and there. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, my son was 3.5 at the time. And this was a big change for him. The firstborn, used to being the center of attention. And we were really feeling sort of these tremors come. I was, close to giving birth, and I knew that I would do some kind of a little ceremony, but it wasn't determined when. But I knew that what Quinn needed was something of his own. And so for me, it can be as simple as that, his own space. And so I went and got him his own little woven basket, and found some special little gifts like rocks and stones. It can be really simple, feather, but a way to honor that as our family was growing, he would have his own little space, and he could find things and collect them and put them in there. And so as things got reorganized and shifted, that wouldn't change for him. And so that was sort of my guiding thing for that ceremony. And I'll never forget, we went for a walk, and it was a horrible walk. Gwen was just freaking out. We couldn't even get home. And Frank and I were looking at each other being like, how are we even going to have a family of 4? Like, we can't even go for a simple walk. And I just said, okay, it's time. We're going to go to our ceremony now. We sat down at the kitchen table. I think I had some yarn, and I just sort of, those are really the moments when you channel spirit, when you don't have anything prepared. And you're like, okay, here we are. We're sitting, and we're honoring that our family is going to be moving from a family of 3 to a family of 4. And we want to recognize, our son, and then, just whatever came, and gave him his special basket and gave him his little gifts. And that for him, like being witnessed, and like he was his own being, and he wouldn't lose that, and we would always love him. It was huge for him, and he still has his special basket to this day. Wow. And he puts his rocks, and he shows me all of his things in his special basket, and he gets really upset when his sister goes near his kids. She has her own special basket. But I think for me, that was like you said, like getting to the core of it. Like what's 1 or 2 specific things, because those experiences will be remembered, and like a lot of the other stuff can be really helpful and beautiful. And maybe you do want the visual feast, and that's what you focus on. But to finish it out, a mentor of mine who did a welcoming to womanhood ceremony for me when I was in my 30s, because I never had one when I was a teenager. I talked with her, and I said, well, can I have some advice? I want to start doing this with my friend. And she said, there's so much out there, and the most important thing is just find what you feel comfortable with. Like, what are the elements that, like she said, for me, it's the 4 directions. You'll always stumble over your words. It doesn't really matter, as long as like have 1 or 2 grounding things for you that will help orient you. And then you kind of just open up to what comes in. And that was really, this was someone who did really beautiful, elaborate, like women weekend ceremonies with all of it, everything. Yeah. And I'm like, I could never do that. It's just not who I am. Maybe one day, but it was so helpful for me, like getting at the core of what's important, what's shifting here.
I think that piece too, that like in the chaos, we can't just take that moment to redirect the energy, because life does get so messy and scattered and busy. Everyone loves that word, that we're all just so busy, but it's like, really, are we though? Like, can we just sit with ourselves for a moment? And I think that those are the moments. I mean, my family's about, I'm chuckling because I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, family 5 to 6 in a few weeks here. Just what can I do for each child, and where are they at developmentally? For my husband too, for myself. It's just so, we're remodeling our whole, just life gets messy. And so how do we not allow those stresses to be what take over? And I think for me, just getting back to why ceremony or ritual is important is for that I keep my compass going where I want it to go, and staying calm for my family, and being able to take those moments of like, wow, okay, we're getting really, things are getting chaotic. Let's just take a moment and pause. And I do a little like sound healing and a little stretching, yoga, meditation. I try to do it every day with my 3 kids. Even, and I'm laughing because it doesn't ever really look ceremonial at all, because the 3-year-old's jumping up and down, the 5-year-old's laying down on the ground doing something totally different, and the 9-year-old's started rolling his eyes at me. And so, but I'm still, the intention is there of just taking that moment to say life is sacred, life is special, and having a family is one of the most special things I think that we can do, in creating these spaces for our children to grow up in, knowing that they're seen and witnessed and important, instead of just going with the flow and going with whatever happens. I think is really valid for them to kind of come to a sense of self. And I think that is what this is about for me. And I think for you too, to just help people know that life is important, that this journey, that these struggles, that these things, that there's meaning to it and that it is important.
You both used the word intention several times when you were talking about all of this. And that is, I think that's the piece that really is striking for me, is that if we can parent with intention, if we can take these moments to think about, and whether it's the morning ritual with your boys, or whether it's this beautiful ceremony for Quinn as he was becoming a big brother, there's so many times when we can just stop for a minute and say, what can we do here to deepen our intention around what we want to create? And so that idea of creating a rite of passage, I could talk with the two of you for hours. This is so fabulous. And I'm realizing both of you have some thoughts about kind of where you would like to see this go in the future. But I'd like to wrap up today with a little bit of just, parting thoughts, because you've both started to talk about, and it's not just a woman's blessing way of, coming into motherhood. It's about, how do we raise these children? How do we create families where we are thinking deeply about this intention for the future? And I had this thought years ago that, if everybody had these kind of witnessing ceremonies when they were children, the world would be a much different place. And then, Rebecca, you even used that word, that they need to be seen, they need to be honored for who they are. And if we can create more of that in our families, and it can be elaborate, or it can be simple, or it can be at different times as they're growing up. And Louisa, you said you didn't have that coming into womanhood ceremony, but you had it at 30. It's never too late to do these things. And so I think I would just ask you each to wrap up with sort of parting thoughts for today, and we'll look forward to going deeper into this, because I think this is so important for our families to really think about, how do we create what it is we want? How do we make those choices for our families that are meaningful, that are relevant, that are resonant? And, your illustration of that basket for Quinn has obviously carried that meaning on. And he will probably end up doing something like that for his son someday. And that's so beautiful. And so, these moments that we can create on the fly can become the rites of passage for the future. So, wrapping up here today, and I'm sure our listeners are going to be going, we want to hear more about all of this, and so we'll bring more in the future.
Yeah, I think you just brushed on family culture again, that you talk about, and really sitting with what is important for each family, having some sort of tangible. I mean, even my late 30s brother, I think, still has his prayer stick that he created at it is these tangible things that we can look back at. If it's the string around the arm or the wrist, that these women can look at and send that love and intention back to the mom, or if it's the stone that we picked when we had whatever thought in mind, or if we were grieving for something and we see an object that speaks to us. I think that there is a sense of finding something tangible to help pull us out of maybe a chaotic moment, I think is definitely helpful. But yes, for me, having 3 boys, there is that piece going forward that I want to create. There's such a beautiful energy in creating these strong, independent, fierce women. And I feel like the masculine energy is a little bit left behind at times, and it's so needed, and it's so vital to have the balance of both. And so I get really excited thinking about how we can help facilitate just the rising up of both really beautiful energies to be balanced with each other and not have one that's overshadowing the other. And I think it is bringing the whole family in. It is letting go of egos a lot of the time and setting aside a lot of preconceived ideas we have of how family should look or how situations should be, and just allowing for growth and change to come into our families, our communities of friends, our society at large, and how we can ripple out the intentionality to just be more more content with ourselves, I think is a big piece for me.
Yeah, along those same lines, I think the way I would articulate pretty much the same thing is like, it's really easy right now to get overwhelmed by all that's wrong in the world and how these, old structures are crumbling. And that's a source of great fear and hope for some. But there's just a lot of grief and a lot of hardship right now. And there's a lot of fear. I know a lot of people I know are like, why are we even bringing children into the world right now? What's it going to be like? And I think having a family for me is a source of hope and a source of empowerment, especially when, things can get really messy at home and chaotic, and I can feel overwhelmed by all the, generational trauma that I'm trying to heal. And then what's happening on a larger sphere. But I think the most empowering thing for me is like just showing up, and I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to have it all figured out, but like showing up imperfectly for my kids and my partner. There's so much power in that. And so I think as mothers, as parents, like we really do have so much more power than we think we have. And it may not be reflected in politically right now, or like the divisiveness in our cis culture and whatever. But what matters is like, there's so many moving parts, and there's so much potential that we're working with now. And just in showing up to repair when you were triggered at your child, showing up if you're about to give birth, and really looking and honoring your children for where they are. Because it's like those little moments. So one of my favorite quotes is a Tom Robbins, and it's everything is sacred and nothing is sacred. And it's like, like that little missed moment in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. But if you caught it, it can also matter a lot. So it kind of like helps you not get caught up in perfectionism and just being like, oh, I'm going to make some amazing moments, so I'm going to really mess up a lot of other ones. But like, if you just keep showing up, you're showing up more than you're not. So that makes a difference.
I was having that thought, just the perfection that we really want things to be perfect in our society, and nothing ever is. And so how can we just have a sense of humor and a sense of playfulness with all the things that we're creating, and just to allow the chaos to come when it comes, and to be just maybe a little more graceful with our own reaction. It's a big one.
Sheila always says space and grace. So so anyhow, thank you two so much. This has just been such a treat and an honor for me. And I'm also in this moment just feeling so blessed to have my daughter and her friend Louisa, and to be a part of their lives, and all of the ways that they have taught me, and that I have been able to try to share with so many different women the knowledge. And so the two of you have expressed so much wisdom today, and I really appreciate your time. And so I hope you've all enjoyed this. I know I have just been full of all kinds of wonderful thoughts. Persephone Rising Rituals, Louisa Carter and Rebecca Tumison. I'm just so proud and happy for the work that you're doing and sharing that with women. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us today for the Moms I Know. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To get the show notes and resources mentioned in today's episode, visit themomsiknow.com. For information on Maria's programs, visit thefutureoffamily.com. And for information on Sheila's programs, visit purplebeatfamily.com. Don't forget to subscribe and rate us on iTunes, and follow us on Instagram at The Moms I Know Podcast. Until next time, have a joyful family journey.